There is a sentence echoing through the present moment like a quiet verdict. The rules-based order is over. At first it sounds like analysis, geopolitics, strategy, the language of think tanks. But when you look closely, it feels less like a conclusion and more like a confession. Because what is collapsing before our eyes is not only an order of rules, it is the belief that rules ever stood above power. For decades, perhaps generations, the world told itself a story. The law had matured beyond force, that institutions that reason above kings, that justice, however imperfect, had a structure, a court, a place to stand. The architecture was convincing. Agreements, treaties, international bodies, declarations of human dignity, a system that claimed to be impartial, universal, binding, but systems are only as real as the will that sustains them. And now that will is fragmenting. Courts still exist, yet their judgments dissolve at the edge of sovereignty. Accusations are made, indictments issued, and still leaders travel, speak, are welcomed, are received. Not because the law is unclear, but because the law is no longer feared, or perhaps more precisely, it is no longer believed in. And so something becomes visible that was always there. Power was never replaced. It was only veiled. The language of order softened it. The rituals of diplomacy concealed it. And now the veil is thinning. And what emerges is older than any institution: strength, interest, survival. Resources speak, armies speak, alliances speak, and the law listens. Yet this is only the outer layer of the unraveling, because beneath the political, something quieter and more profound is taking place: the erosion of spiritual authority. There was a time when institutions, religious, moral, intellectual, claimed not only influence but truth. They did not merely organize communities, they defined reality. They answered the question of good and evil with certainty. They named what was just, what was forbidden, what was sacred. Today, that certainty has dissolved, not entirely, but enough. What remains of these institutions often feels different, less like a source of truth, more like a marker of belonging. Identity has replaced revelation. Affiliation has replaced inquiry. One no longer asks, what is true, but rather, who am I aligned with? And from that alignment, truth is inferred. This is a subtle but decisive shift. Because when truth becomes a function of identity, it ceases to be binding. It becomes negotiable, contextual, tribal. It divides rather than reveals. It justifies rather than judges. And so the world enters a strange condition, a landscape full of voices but empty of authority. This is what collapse actually feels like. Not the disappearance of structures, but the disappearance of trust in them. The court still stands, but its word is conditional. The institution still speaks, but its voice is partial. The leader still declares, but belief no longer follows automatically. Everything remains, and yet something essential is gone: trust. And without trust, even the most elaborate system becomes hollow. But there is another way to understand this moment. Perhaps the rule-based order is not being destroyed. Perhaps it is being revealed as what it always was: a fragile agreement sustained by power, not a transcendent reality beyond it. And perhaps the same is true for the spiritual institutions. What if their collapse is not the disappearance of truth, but the exposure of everything that stood in its place? This is the more unsettling possibility that we are not witnessing the death of truth, but the removal of its intermediaries. And if that is so, then a deeper question emerges that cannot be answered by courts, leaders, or institutions. Where does truth come from now? Not legally, not politically, but existentially. If no structure can guarantee it, no authority can enforce it, no identity can contain it, then truth must be encountered differently. Not inherited, not declared, not imposed, discovered. This is a far more demanding path. It offers no comfort of belonging, no certainty of consensus, no shield of institutional legitimacy. It requires discernment, patience, and above all responsibility. Because once truth is no longer outsourced, it becomes something one must stand before directly, alone if necessary. And yet, there is something strangely precise about the timing of this shift, because collapse, in its deepest sense, is not chaos for its own sake. It is exposure, a stripping away of what cannot hold, a return to what is essential by removing everything that is not. The rules weaken, the structures tremble, the authorities falter. And in that instability, something begins to reappear, not as a system but as a question, not imposed from above but rising from within. What is true? Not for a nation, not for a group, but in itself. And whoever is willing to live inside that question without rushing to replace it with ideology, identity, or power stands at the beginning of something that does not collapse, because it was never built on agreement to begin with.